Good evening, everybody. The Russian warship that you see on your screen among the warships that are now positioned in the international waters just off the coast of northeastern Australia, where world leaders, including President Obama and President Putin, have gathered in Brisbane for the G20 summit. The ships, well, they were beckoned there by their nation's ambitious, reckless leader who wants both security and to remind his counterparts their sanctions against Russia aren't likely to be borne without consequence. Putin is a man who, to this point, has waged a successful campaign of aggression and annexation of territory to enlarge his already substantial power and the borders of the nation that he rules. The Russian president seems intent on restoring Russia to a prominence that a generation of Russians have only dreamt of since the fall of the Soviet Union. Putin's imperialism in Eastern Europe is more evident by the day, unchecked and unchallenged by President Obama, save but by rhetoric only. Mr. Obama is a man surrounded by conflict internationally and at home. Just more than a week after a disastrous midterm election, President Obama, defying the wishes of the American public and the Republican-controlled legislative branch of government. The president promising to unilaterally legalize more than 5 million illegal immigrants by executive fiat.
I indicated to Speaker Boehner several months ago that if, in fact, Congress failed to act, I would use all the lawful authority that I possess to try to make the system work better. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen before the end of the year.
But that comment the president has just expressed reveals he is also in conflict with himself and his record. More than once over the past 3 years, President Obama has acknowledged he doesn't have the legal authority to change the nation's immigration laws without congressional consent. Here is what he admitted about the limits of presidential power.
For me to simply, through executive order, ignore those congressional mandates would not conform with my appropriate role as president. With respect to the notion that I can just suspend deportations through executive order, that's just not the case. This notion that somehow I can just change the laws unilaterally is just not true.
And we are now back with our panel. If you wanted some real fun, you should have heard these guys during the break. Brad Blakeman, Corey Elon. This go around, we're going to focus on immigration. We want you to respond to a clip from the G20 of the president asked about taking a potential executive order. Here it is.
You said, quote, "I'm president, I'm not king. I can't do these things just by myself."
Right.
In 2013, you said, "I'm not the emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed." Mr. President, what has changed since then?
There are certain limits to what falls within the realm of prosecutorial discretion in terms of how we apply existing immigration laws. And what we've continued to do is to talk to Office of Legal Counsel that's responsible for telling us what the rules are, what the scope of our operations are, and determining where it is appropriate for us to say, we're not going to deport 11 million people.
Breaking tonight, we now appear to be days away from President Obama bypassing Congress and allowing some 5 million illegal immigrants to stay in America, despite his own earlier assertions that he has no legal right to do this. Good evening, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Kelly File. President Obama came out swinging once again today, dismissing threats from Republican lawmakers that taking executive action on immigration would cause a constitutional crisis. He has been promising for years that he would go through Congress to achieve immigration reform. Back in 2008, then Senator Obama said he would get reform done in his first year in office if elected. When in fact he was sworn into office, he had large Democratic majorities in both the Senate and the House. So large, in fact, he could have designed and passed a bill exclusively through the Democrats. Instead, he focused on what would become his signature legislation, Obamacare. By the time President Obama began his second term, he no longer had control of the House. He vowed again to make immigration a focus of his agenda, but then the administration turned its sights on gun control. In June 2013, The Senate finally passed an immigration bill, but the House by that point said no. So now, after a major midterm election loss that put both the Senate and the House in GOP control, the president says he now plans to bypass Congress altogether, allowing with the stroke of a pen millions to stay in this country.
Good evening, everybody. The Cold War has resumed. Russia is not only ratcheting up its Cold War rhetoric, but dispatching troops and scores of tanks and advanced weaponry into eastern Ukraine to further advance Vladimir Putin's unchecked and so far unchallenged expansionist ambitions. NATO's top commander, General Philip Breedlove, today confirmed that the Russian army is indeed invading Ukraine from the east.
We have seen columns of Russian equipment, primarily Russian tanks, Russian artillery, Russian air defense systems, and Russian combat troops entering into Ukraine. Forces, money, support, supplies, weapons are flowing back and forth across this border completely at will, and that is not a good situation.
As General Breedlove says, not a good situation, and a situation that is deteriorating quickly. General Breedlove also said Russian forces already deployed in Crimea are being reinforced, that Russia is sending what he called nuclear-capable troops into the disputed territory with heavy weaponry. The general made it clear as well that NATO has not yet assessed nor confirmed that Russia is sending nuclear weapons for positioning in Crimea. Also tonight, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced that Russia will be returning to the Cold War era of more than 2 decades ago as it's set to reinstitute long-range bomber patrols that will be approaching U.S. territory, interests, and our military presence throughout the Western Hemisphere. Those patrols will likely be stretching from the Arctic region into the Gulf of Mexico, a threatening and confrontational extension of military power by Russia that hasn't been seen since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Pentagon today, however, responded to all of that with constraint, almost passivity. As President Obama is preparing to issue that threatened executive fiat that would give de facto amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants. Critics call it unconstitutional. It could come next week. A new report from the Center for Immigration Studies shows 42% of those taking advantage of the new Medicaid expansion under Obamacare are immigrants and their U.S.-born children. There is no differentiation in that report between legal and illegal immigrants. And that comes at the cost to taxpayers of almost $5 billion over 2 years. A new report by the Associated Press finds the federal government now uses only drones to patrol almost half the nearly 2,000-mile border with Mexico. Let me repeat, drones, only drones, surveying half of our border with Mexico. That means no agents, no camera towers, no ground sensors, no fences in many places. But Predator drones sweeping remote mountains, canyons, and rivers with high-resolution cameras. That's border security.
Live coverage. The prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Imam Ahmad Shabli, Islamic Society of Central New Jersey, Monmouth Junction, New Jersey.
Peace and the blessings of Allah be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Praise be to Allah.
Obama's foreign policy is in shambles. He pivots to Asia as China and Russia lock arms with Iran, creating a neo-Axis alliance that effectively means there is now more than one superpower. A new Cold War is underway. For more on the emerging New World Order, join us tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific.